My girlfriend told me that if my mother was dying, she would still expect me to choose her first. That was the moment I stopped thinking we had a communication problem. I'm 25. My girlfriend Tessa is 22. We had been together for a little over a year. For the first few months, I thought Tessa was just intense. She wanted constant contact. Good morning texts, calls during lunch, video calls at night. If I took an hour to answer, she noticed. If I sounded tired, she asked what was wrong. At first, I liked it. I thought it meant she cared. Then I realized caring always seemed to require proof from me. Tessa could scroll through her phone while I talked. She could cancel plans because she was tired. She could spend an entire Saturday in bed watching videos and tell me she had no energy to go anywhere. But if I wanted one evening to play games with friends, she said I was choosing them over her. I work as an electrician. My hours start early. Tessa is finishing a graphic design course and still lives with her parents. Most weekends I drove 40 minutes to her house. I paid for fuel. I brought food. I planned dates. For the last 3 months of our relationship, we barely went on any. Every suggestion got the same answer. Maybe. Then when the day came, I'm tired. So I would sit in her room while she watched short videos. Sometimes I would tell her a story about work and get no response. Then 5 seconds later, she would say, "Oh, wow," without looking up. I brought it up twice. The first time she said, "I'm listening." The second time she said, "You know I have trouble focusing. Why are you making me feel bad about it?" I said, "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I want to feel like we're spending time together." She said, "We are together." I said, "Being in the same room is not always spending time together." She rolled her eyes. That sounds like something from a relationship podcast. I let it go. That was my mistake. I kept letting things go because every disagreement became bigger than the original issue. If I asked for more attention, I was needy. If I wanted time alone, I was distant. If I suggested doing something active, I was judging her lifestyle. If I sat beside her and did nothing, she was happy. The relationship worked best when I had no requirements. Then one night we were on a video call. Tessa sent me a picture of a ridiculous costume she'd seen online. It was a pink dress with an apron and stockings. She laughed and said, "You should wear this for me." I said no. She asked again. I said, "I'm not wearing a dress." She said, "You wouldn't do one stupid thing to make me happy?" I thought she was joking. I said, "I'd probably do it if I had a little daughter someday and she wanted to play dress up." Tessa stopped smiling. She said, "So you do it for a kid but not for me?" I said, "A child asking her dad to play is different." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because it is." She said, "So your future child would matter more than your girlfriend." I told her that was not what I said. She asked, "Who comes first?" I laughed because I still thought the conversation was ridiculous. I said, "I don't rank imaginary family members." She muted herself. 10 minutes later, she came back and said I had answered the question. I asked what answer she wanted. She said, "I should always be your number one." I said, "If we had children, they would be a priority too." She said, "No, your partner comes first." I said, "Sometimes, not every time." She said, "Then I picked the wrong man." That line bothered me. But the next day, she acted normal. I thought the fight was over. It was not. For 2 days, she kept making comments. I joined my friends online for an hour. She said, "Careful, your real family is waiting." I called my sister back while Tessa was texting me. She said, "Nice to know where I rank." When I told her I was going to my parents' house on Sunday, she asked, "Do I need to compete with your mother too?" Finally, I said, "Stop turning everyone in my life into competition." She said, "I'm asking to matter." I said, "You matter. You just don't get to be the only person who matters." She called me selfish. I asked how that made sense. She said a serious boyfriend should put his girlfriend first. I said, "What if my mother was seriously ill?" She answered immediately, "Then obviously you help her, but I still come first emotionally." I asked what that meant. She said, "If I needed you at the same time, you choose me." I said, "Even if my mother was dying?" She paused. Then she said, "Yes. If we're building a life together, I should be number one." That was the turning point. Not the costume, not the phone, not the canceled dates. That sentence. I told her, "I will never promise to abandon people I love to prove I love you." She said, "Then don't expect me to give you everything." I said, "What are you giving me now?" She went silent. I did not mean it as an insult. I meant it as a real question. I drove to her house almost every weekend. I arranged my schedule around her. I listened when she had problems with school, her parents, her friends. I sat in her room for hours because she said she hated being alone, and most of the time she barely looked up from her phone. She said, "I give you love." I said, "So do I." She said, "Clearly not enough." After that, she started insulting me, not screaming, almost worse. She was calm. She said I was weak. She said I was not mature enough for a real relationship. She said a real man would make his woman feel secure. I asked her to stop. She said, "I'm being honest." The next day, she told two of her friends about the argument. One messaged me. She said Tessa had basic standards, and I was making her beg for affection. I asked if Tessa told her the argument started because I would not promise to choose her over a dying parent. She did not answer that. She just said, "You always make things sound extreme." That was when I understood Tessa had already built a version of the story where I was emotionally unavailable. Her friends knew I played games. They knew I sometimes wanted evenings alone. They knew I complained about her phone use. They did not know I drove to her house 4 times a week. They did not know I had stopped making plans because she canceled them. They did not know I was expected to sit quietly beside her so she would not feel lonely. That night I sent Tessa a message. I told her the insults had to stop. I said, "You have called me weak, selfish, immature, and a bad boyfriend for 2 days. I am trying to explain how I feel. You keep punishing me for not giving the answer you want." She reacted with a thumbs down emoji. That was it. I asked, "Do you actually care that you're hurting me?" She replied, "I'm not doing this right now." I said, "I'm not threatening to leave. I'm telling you I'm hurt." She wrote, "Okay, sorry my honesty hurts your feelings. I guess I'll lie from now on." I stared at that message. Then I asked the question I probably should not have asked. "So you really think I'm weak and a bad boyfriend?" She sent a shrug emoji. Then she wrote, "If you're crying, send a picture." I did not answer. The next morning, Tessa called me 6 times. I ignored the first 5. On the 6th, I answered. She was crying. She said she'd gone too far. She said she gets cruel when she feels rejected. She said she has always been afraid people will choose someone else and leave her behind. For the first time, she admitted that her need to be first was not really about me. I understood her better after that. I really did. But understanding why someone hurts you does not make the hurt disappear. She asked if I was breaking up with her. I said, "I don't know." She said, "If you leave now, you prove I was right." I said, "No, you don't get to make staying the only proof that I love you." She cried harder. I almost apologized. I almost drove over. That was what I always did. Then I remembered the shrug emoji, the picture comment, the months of sitting beside someone who demanded my full attention while giving me half of hers. I told her I needed a week without contact. She said that was cruel. I said, "Calling me weak until I agree with you is cruel." She said, "You know I didn't mean all of it." I said, "Then why am I supposed to figure out which insults were real?" We are still on that break. Her mother texted me yesterday. She said Tessa's struggling and asked me to be patient because Tessa has had a difficult year. I believe that. I also know Tessa has been unhappy for a long time. I know she hates being alone. I know she is scared of being second. Those things are real. But I'm starting to think I became her boyfriend, driver, planner, company, and emotional proof that she was important. And somewhere in that arrangement, I stopped being a person who was allowed to need things too. I don't think love means choosing your partner over everyone, every time. I think anyone who demands first place in every situation is not asking for love. They're asking for control. Maybe that is too harsh. Maybe I should have recognized how insecure she was and reassured her better. But I cannot promise that a future wife will always come before my children. I cannot promise I will ignore a sick parent because my partner needs proof. And I cannot keep accepting insults because the person saying them is afraid I might leave. So now I have a week to decide. Do I go back because I finally understand why she acts this way? Or do I leave because understanding the reason does not change what she expects from me?